Thank you guys so much for coming. Just before we get started here, if we could just ask that everybody just kind of mutes themselves just to make sure that our poets aren't interrupted during their readings. Feel free to use the chat and write any notes that you have or any thoughts. And there's also like the reactions as well that you can do. But there we go. But without further ado, I will let Phil and Baruch take it away.
Baruch, you want to say something? Where are you there? Oh, there you are.
Well, the first thing I want to say is Mazel Tov to Phil on the marriage of his daughter. It was last week, right?
It was just this past Sunday.
Oh, blessing on their heads.
We're still recovering from the from the whole experience. Thank you, Baruch.
You're
Thank
welcome. It has been wonderful working with you, and it's amazing that we've had so many years that we can't even remember of doing this. And we should have many more healthy, wonderful years of poetry ahead
Absolutely.
of us.
I think we do. I think we
I
do.
think so, yeah.
Now that one
And
quarter's out,
also
out of the
want to
way, we
welcome
can
everyone here.
look forward to. Kidding.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Baruch. It's always a pleasure, and I think this is the end of our fifth or sixth year, but since neither of us are good with numbers, leave it at that. But thanks so much for joining us, and the season's going fast. It's been really really nice. If you want to catch up on our other readings, they're on YouTube. I don't think we have a YouTube channel, but if you just Google virtual Jewish poetry reading JCC Buffalo, YouTube, you'll find them, and there's been
Yeah.
some really terrific reading.
It's yeah, we have like JCC Buffalo YouTube, so that's the channel. It's just JCC
Oh.
Buffalo. Yeah, and then there's a whole playlist of all the Jewish poetry series we've done. So
See, I just find this out. No, this is how slow we are. Thank you, Erica. And this is Erica, who is just an incredible partner and just friend, and she's really the JCC Buffalo matron and maestro, and has a very long, important title, but she
I don't remember. So
I don't. She's just really cool, so thank you so much.
thank you.
I'm gonna and we always have three poets, and then if you have a chat, as you mentioned, you want to say something, please do. And I think I don't know, Baruch, you had sent Erica the titles of the recent books by the
Yeah, I sent the links, so
Yep.
we'll just get them out before we're done or at a
yeah.
certain point.
Since we're live reading, the books would be at the table in the back, and you can go and look through them and take them home with you. So order these poets to your home through their books, and that's an option. I'm very very delighted to introduce our first poet, who is as we all know, he's a long time co-host of this particular reading series, and he's been a pleasure to work with. But in case you didn't know, he was also a poet, by the way. He's been hiding that part of himself. No, I think we all know. His latest book of poems has got the incredibly wonderful title called "The Broken Heart is the Master Key," which was just released in August, this past August, so it's not even a year old. His previous books of poems are Bar Mitzvah Dreams, which is a wild book, which I highly recommend. Really terrific book. And also Dry Nectars of Plenty won the Big City Lit's chapbook contest. Are there any copies of that available yet, Baruch?
Are there any? There are no more
Chapbook.
there are no more copies available of it at
That
this
says a
point.
lot for the book that it's sold out. That's
It's
good.
sold, yeah, it's sold out. Uh, but I don't want to say how many copies there actually were in the beginning
Well,
because that then it will take away from the idea that it's sold
well, you
out.
just you just did, Baruch,
Let's
but
just say that it's amazing it's sold out.
yeah, it's amazing it's sold out. The less copies you produce, the easier it is to stay sold out. He's been featured in the American Scholar, the wonderful journal One Art, a poetry journal, the Teferet Journal, a Patterson Poetry Literary Review, the Forward. Wow, ought to be in the Forward with the luminaries, Isaac Singer and Michael Gold, all those people. Way to go. He's taught courses and still teaches courses in the multicultural American literature, Shakespeare, wow, poetry, and writing at Touro University in Manhattan. I just want to say personally, around the time I met Baruch, he had invited me to a poetry reading he organized that took place at a comedy club. Places. Yes, where jokes and laughter reigned and poems were read. Funny poems. Like a Jewish Whitman, Baruch's poems contain multitudes. They can be hilarious, but they can also be sad or a combination of both. In other words, Baruch's poetry grabs hold of the Jewish zeitgeist. About his poetry, Baruch said, I feel the need to make Jewish culture relatable to other cultures and close the divides between us. He gravitates toward depictions of Jewish love intertwined with the mystical and the stories of the Torah. In the lovely poem he wrote, one wonderful poem about his grandmother, his namesake Bracha, the Hebrew word for blessing, Baruch, of course, is the Hebrew for blessing as well, writes, Bracha also means to draw down. When we bless the challah, our livelihood, or the blowing of the shofar, we draw God to this world, says the Zohar. So draw us down, Baruch, poetry.
Oh, yeah. All right. Thank you for that great introduction. Um, I'm actually going to start with one of the few poems I've written since my book came out in August. So this is not in the book. So this is a premiere. Um, I like to take a long time between, like, I like to take like a year off, not because I'm lazy, but I am lazy, but because I feel like it's a way to sort of like build build the storehouses of creativity in your mind, um, and to find a new vision. Anyway, let's get to the poem. Um, this poem is called Your Grandmother Might Have Said. A great Dybbuk has taken hold of American soul when young Jews must barricade the furious doors of college libraries. You hear mobs demand your kind return to the old country, where ditches scar the forests, cradling ancestral bones. When you look up, prismatic strands of light descend the Brooklyn horizon, reminding you to love it still. This land where you can merge with that great current of Hasidim on Kingston Avenue, rushing together into the days of awe. Okay. Um, this next poem is about one of my all-time favorite baseball players, Hank Greenberg. And if you don't know him, it's um, uh, probably because Sandy Koufax became famous for what Hank Greenberg did first, and that is not play baseball on Yom Kippur. Um, and so, but Hank Greenberg was a great player, um, and actually he suffered a lot of anti-Semitism, much more than he kind of paved the way for Sandy Koufax, you could say. Anyway, the poem is called "The Tiger of Detroit." Every one of his home runs in 1938 was hit off of Hitler. Rage transformed into urgency in the batter's box. He wanted so much to amaze those who called him Christ killer, Sheeny, kike, panpresser. They say only Jackie Robinson had it worse. When he did not play on Yom Kippur, he electrified the fasting congregation. Tall shul doors opened to reveal the tiger slipping through. The rabbi pounded his pulpit for silence. Women swiveled their necks. Children stood on the chairs to catch a glimpse of Greenberg, a man who never played cards, knowing his teammates would holler if a Jew threw down a full house, a royal flush, taking all their earnings home to buy his wife a necklace bright as the closest strand of stars. Okay, now I'm going to shift to my second book, which I haven't read from in a long time, and I'm feeling a little bit guilty. Like I feel like poems like you've written and haven't like given attention to for a while, like they kind of like haunt you and are crying out for you to revisit them. Um, but maybe I'm absurd. Who knows? Okay. So I wrote a series of poems about beards. I know that sounds weird, but as a Jew, it kind of makes sense. Beards uh, actually have actually Kabbalistically represent attributes of compassion. So that's why, as a Jew, I feel it's important to have a beard. And that's what also drew me to writing about beards. Okay. Okay. The Hasidic musician cuts off his beard, dyes his hair to match the gold of 1 million records sold, explains the love of the one above is not dependent on a thicket dangling down a Jew's face. He takes a long journey, revealing new songs to the old world, then returns to the crushed leather sofa of his living room. His little boy rushes into his lap, but where once the son had something to pull himself upward, to kiss his father's lips, the father must now bend his love down to meet his son. Okay. And so here is another Beard poem. The hot June sun only relit my loneliness. So on impulse, I did what she had always wanted. I shaved away the whole of my beard. Why do I try to satisfy those who already have long left my side? Whereas beards come back, they never do. And um, here's one more beard poem to tide you over till someday you somehow hear another poem about beards in your life. I can't tell you when that will be. Um, most Hebrew schools cut the Song of Songs out of the classroom. I would have liked to learn how thighs can be of gold, what it was to love a woman whose breath was the very scent of fresh apricots, whose young body was the fruit of the palm in my palms. But a history of love in open fields must be concealed from the young, as King Solomon said, never awaken love until it is ripe, lest we feel the warmest happiness before we know the ages of longing it takes to understand it, lest we wander cities craving dark curved women before we are strong enough to keep promises, lest we are taken for good by the glint of light on eyes, the roundness of dates, the color of figs, and mistake the untrimmed beards of our rabbis, mystical symbols of deep compassion, as the mark of wild and thoughtless lovers. Okay, moving back to my more recent book. Um, my father is actually has joined us tonight, and and I was hoping he would do so, so that I could share this poem, or I would have shared it anyway, but now it's even better to share it since he's here. It's called A Gift in the Shallows of the Sea. Treading clear water in late July, my father thanks me for pushing him to go to the cool Mediterranean. Out of a heat wave so strong, it distorts both the present and the future. There are jellyfish warnings. There are jellyfish warnings, but we see only one pale, poisonous body drifting away mid-wave. One night on Reese Beach, years ago, I suddenly proposed to your mother in the moonlight, my father tells me for the first time. The tide drifting distance between us, the shared fact drawing us close. His story, a gift in the shallows of the sea, as waves gleam in lines scrawled by the sun. Okay. Um, Now I'm going to read that poem that Phil quoted from and stole my thunder. Just kidding. All right, this is called After Bracha, and it's about my great grandmother. Um, it was interesting, actually, this semester I had a Muslim student who had the Arabic version of my name. But I didn't want to tell her that I figured it out because I thought she might think I'm like some sort of weird professor. But she probably already thought that anyway. Anyhow, after bracha, my mother reminds me I am named after her grandma Bracha, who brought her sweet poppy seed pastries. Bracha mastered the parting of childhood darkness, making excellent stuffed cabbage and strudel delicacies for the delicate heart. Until dying, her husband Yeshaya held a great distaste for work, but peddled junk on the streets of Erie in a horse-drawn wagon instead of a truck, a mark of shame on his family, burning like a streak left from a whip. Bracha is the Hebrew word for blessing, for its bearer a lot to live up to. A version of the word begins the blessing before a Jew eats, even the food, even if the food is cold gruel, even if the food prods memory. A recipe from shtetls of impaled mothers, children, scribes. Bracha, a master seamstress, made a yellow dress like an overturned buttercup, weaved with moonlight for my grandmother, an expert complainer all her life, who managed to degrade that glowing outfit, calling it old country fashion. We read numerous blessings and thanks. A blessing for just being able to arise in early pink blue light, a blessing for when lightning veins a cloud or strikes the oak into flames, a blessing for when the earth quakes, sacred pictures of your family, all you have left of them launching from the walls into lethal puzzles of glass. A blessing for the first time the ocean spreads before you, multitudes filling azure depths, sunlight igniting tips of waves. A blessing for the rare, beautiful creatures, the matriarchs, Rachel and Sarah, Queen Sheba of Ethiopia, Queen Esther of Persia, Tamar, daughter of David, Yael, killer of Sisera, Avishag, who pressed her young body against David in his dying days just to keep him warm. In 54, her husband died, so Bracha moved in with her daughter's family in Pittsburgh. She took care of everybody, even the dogs, feeding them cow brains they loved. God stole much of her family in pogroms. Still, she kept kosher, refusing to eat out. This was one of the things she carried from a shtetl called Pliskov. Bracha drank hot water with cherry jam for dessert, turning the liquid to dark rubies, warm sweetness erasing memory for an instant. Bracha also means to draw down, When we bless our challah, our livelihood, or the blowing of the shofar, we draw God to this world, says the Zohar, like children calling to parents out of the darkness. Bracha later married a Jersey man named Abe, who made a big deal of promising her a wonderful life, but hoarded every cent he had while she spoiled him with kugels and apple pastries. Abe died and left Bracha nothing but the spite of $1 in his will. Sholem Shachna, Bracha's father, was the shtetl's teacher. He ensured Bracha read and wrote Yiddish. All her life, she loved to correspond with friends, kept a notebook, pale blue pale blue lines of the normal color of sky when clear, and heavy flames do not whip and wave out of thatched roofs. Okay, one more, and then we'll move on to other the more wonderful poets the night has to feature. This is called To Be Wicks. I think because the Jews are weak, the Holocaust happened, said the husky Sicilian. The student wearing the blue Giants jersey in the front row. No one there corrected him, not the visiting Jewish professor who was busy pushing his gold wire glasses to the bridge of his nose. We were weak in that immense classroom, but after ages of being trampled, buried in shallow pits, racked in the Inquisition, experimented upon by the master race, still we build our schools and shuls everywhere, learning our mystical texts, telling us that only our bodies serve as wicks for the flames of godliness. And when we burn, we burn, we burn, we do not burn out. Thanks.
All right, Baruch. Thank you so much. Thank you for blessing us with your poetry. Now you have to go back to being a co-host, which is an honor. Thank you so much. Okay, I want to introduce our next wonderful poet, uh, Sean Dubrow. Did I get that? Close? Anyway, she's no matter what you call her, she's still the author of 3 books of nonfiction and 10 poetry collections, including most recently Civilians. She's the author of The Wounded Line, a guide to writing poems of trauma, which is an incredible contribution, I think, to poetry. And I appreciate her writing that book, and serves as editor of Writing from Trauma, an interdisciplinary series of craft books published by the University of New Mexico Press. She's appeared in many journals, including the New England Review, Southern Review, Plowshares, a distinguished professor of creative writing at the University of North Texas. Currently, and I want to mention this because I think it's really cool. Jehanne is ambitiously working on a book-length series of sonnets inspired by and about the first woman Yiddish poet, which is amazing. Glickel, I don't know if I got that right, but Glickel?
Yeah.
Hameln?
Yeah, of Hameln is
Hameln
the little city in Germany.
has called A Bit of Martyred Clay. And in his essay, A Whole Life of Poems, she has said that she saw a whole life of poems in what scholars describe as Glickel's book as the only extant pre-modern Yiddish memoir written by a woman, which I think is really cool that you're bringing that out. There's been memoirs, but you're putting her out of the back burner, and that's really, really nice. I just want to quote from the first of the 7 poems that is published that you've had published from that collection so far. I assume you're still working on it.
Yes.
Yeah, because I love these lines. It's from the poem. My mother said our worries are like butter knives. They scrape but seldom cut. And so she spoke instead of fruit and flower, the honey's shifting shape. So let's listen to Jean's poems of honey's shifting shape.
Thank you, Philip. I'm delighted to be here with David and Baruch, and I'm going to start by reading two poems from my most recent collection, Civilians, which is the final book in my military spouse trilogy. My husband served in the Navy for 20 years, and this last book examines what happens when the active duty service member gives up a life of uniforms and uniformity and returns to civilian life. And I think David might be reading some formal poems tonight, so I tried to pick some as well. This is Civilian. There are several poems in the book that are just titled Civilian. I'm trying to find different definitions for the term, and maybe some of you will recognize it's a villanelle. Civilian. I bring the war into my bed each night and let it press metallic to my cheek. I barely move beneath the trembling light that it emits, a semaphore both bright and shadowy, its message is oblique. I bring a war into my bed. Each night it floats across the sheets toward me. Despite the little swells of fear, I never speak. I barely move beneath the trembling light, the bite of sea salt on my lips, the slight unnerving sound of waves the anchors creak. I bring his war into my bed each night, anticipate its sonar ping, invite its touch. I know the heat its missiles seek. I barely move. Beneath the trembling light, I am a target in the line of sight. I am a shore toward which the cruisers streak. I bring our war into my bed each night and barely move beneath its trembling light. Throughout this trilogy, I often wrote little sonnets about objects related to war. And so this is a poem inspired by what was called the Acme number 470 clicker, which was a little tool that was used by paratroopers in the 101st Airborne Division on D-Day. And it was a way of signaling to one another in the dark. The tool was pocket-sized, designed to rest between a soldier's fingers and his thumb, a toy. But when the metal was compressed against the brass, it made the voice of some lost insect in the dark. He clicked at once to ask, "Are you an enemy or friend?" So brief the sound was barely utterance. He listened for a clicking back. To spend the night crouched in uncertainty, the rush across the shadows, hours of pushing past long grass. It's hard imagining the hush, and then the stridulation low and fast that for a moment quieted his doubt, the little noise of crickets chirping out. And that's really what it sounds like. It sounds like a little cricket in the dark. So I'm mostly tonight going to read new stuff, and I thought I'd start with a few of those Glickle sonnets. I've been working on this project since late last year. Glickle is, as Philip was pointing out, the earliest known Yiddish language woman memoirist. And she wrote her memoirs between 1691 and 1691 and 1719. And these are all untitled in the way of early modern sonnets. My mother learned the trade of making gold and silver into lace. I loved to stand nearby and watch the way her bobbins fanned across a pillow top, 12 pins to hold the glinting ornament in place. Controlled, meticulous, precise, my mother planned the lace inside her mind, each gilded band embellished with acanthus leaves. She sold the pieces quickly, never keeping one to wear herself. She said the scrolls and vines were meant for royal gowns, and having spun the thread, she had no need for those designs. My mother was, I didn't understand before, like metal wrapped around a silken core. And at the end of the memoirs, it's very strange. They're delightful to read. They're a fascinating insight into 17th century German Jewish life. She saw everything. Glickel saw the bubonic plague. She saw Jewish refugees coming from Poland. She was part of a disastrous crowd crush that occurred inside a synagogue. And at the end of the book, the last thing we see is she has this strange vision while washing her dishes in the river. I'm assuming she was using the river as a kind of mikveh for her dishes. So this poem is inspired by that moment. I still remember how I knelt beside the river, washing dishes in the dark, when all at once the stars were magnified and glittering like glass. There was a spark, as if the evening sky were made of steel and someone took a flint to it. And then there was no shadow, everything unreal and luminous. The heavens shut again. I saw the valley dim, as though a hand had drawn a velvet curtain in a hall. It seemed the darkness was a reprimand for taking in too much. I still recall how light was offered like a crystal plate, a thing to give and then obliterate. So I'm also going to read a few poems from, I always like to work on 3 or 4 books at the same time because I become really tired of my voice. And so I find if I'm working on multiple projects simultaneously, the minute I'm fatigued with one project, I turn my attention to another. So for about 3 or 4 years, I've been working on a book of poems called The Brief Temple Taken Down, which examines the relationship between the health of the body and the health of the body politic. And it begins with a sonnet inspired by a line that I love. Mark Rothko was being interviewed by Seldom Rodman in 1957, and he said that his work was mostly focused on, quote, tragedy, ecstasy, doom, and so on. And so that's the name of the title. Once I walked with my parents through a room of liquid hues. The crowd so dense we bent or stretched to see the canvases, fragment of pink, a wisp of black like dark perfume that floated through the air, an orange plume. The way uncertain creatures track a scent, we followed tints and tones, the bleak descent to shadow, each later painting like a tomb sealed shut. And after, on the empty street, the ground was full of petals. Cherry trees had tossed their blossoms everywhere, a crush of aching flowers underneath our feet. The sky was gray, 1,000 subtleties created by some distant hazy brush. So this manuscript was mostly began with a catastrophic year in which my mother faced a series of life-threatening surgeries, including a spinal surgery that could have left her paralyzed, and within 6 months she had a quadruple bypass as well. And so this poem is called Quadruple Bypass. My mother was once held at knife point for a day. The man fixed the blade at the blue paces of her pulse, as if tracing the ground for water, divining as it's known. Or maybe I'm thinking of the pointed device that searches for sapphire, bright veins beneath the earth. Throughout my childhood, I imagined his hand, and my mother's body became the site of every narrative. After she freed herself, she returned to a room of knocked over chairs, their backs split with the force of invasion. Dried blood was flecked across the wall like bits of iron ore. I don't believe it's possible to forget that sort of terror. It settles inside, it sifts the shelf tectonically. Often, I picture a landscape where not much occurs, just the wind rubbing a hollow into the hill. What soft tenacity. But that view is not my mother. Small knives have taken parts of her for years. I know there are sites, no matter the disaster, where something endures, each season a diagnostic to test how long the trees will stand, and yet the desert willow continues to release its purple scent. This last time, when again the surgeon returned to the scene of my mother, it was her heart held still, cross-clamped and cauterized. Such violence in that healing, the doctor warned her she would feel what might resemble grief. Now, my mother is no longer a whole country, but a series of rooms, warm chambers where the windows are kept open so any kind of weather can pass through. So in this book, I'm sort of moving between thinking about these personal catastrophes and watching the large scale catastrophes that are unfolding here in the United States. And this next poem, Encounter, very much owes a debt to the great Polish poet Czesław Miłosz and his wonderful little poem called Encounter. And my poem is called Encounter as well. I am walking the new neighborhood, passing the lawn signs that promise to make something great again. There are thrushes in the trees like grumbling foliage. There are trash cans open-mouthed. For years, I've been drafting a book about trauma, how words may form a likeness of the mind that's torn. The past tears easily as paper, I write. And don't the leaves on the ground resemble ripped poems, as if the weather keeps trying to find the right phrase, all those crumpled revisions of the seasons? The red flags are flapping on the block, but I favor the gesture of birds hunched over branches, the insistent blue of their wings. Today, I will finish the book about trauma. I've spent all afternoon looking for more fragments, these perforations I write. In our country, poets aren't killed for writing poems. They aren't sent to prison. But in the cities of my childhood, Warsaw, for instance, a poet would describe a ceaseless field to mean the state, its silence overgrown, the blade that cuts all stems to the same height. Near the end of my book, I write, it's easy to forget everything but grief. I think we should remember the Polish poets smoking their black market cigarettes, burned stanzas between their lips. They could stare across grassland to see what was winging up ahead, birds and their fabled voices, glass splinters of song. In the distance, a creature running, this small resistance among thorns. So even before October 7th, I found that I was writing a lot of poems about anti-Semitism in America. I think partly because a lot of the teaching that I do is about literature of the Shoah. So maybe I'm particularly tuned to little undercurrents. And of course, now we are all very aware. So this poem is called Hineni. In the painting by Chagall, figures move diffusely through the scene as in the way of light through glass. Red is the father, a yellow burning is the boy laid on a fog of fire. So many questions here. Why Isaac winks at us, why two angels hover like a mist of white and blue. In the brown distance, someone is carrying a cross, someone running from the ghetto of a later time, the old world turned to blazing. What I like about Chagall is that he sketches the biblical beside the daily news. In my tradition, we call this story the binding, not perhaps because Isaac is bound to an altar pinned by his father's daggered faith. No, we're tied by the ligature of history, the purple wound it leaves. Here I am, says Abraham, when he's summoned to kill his only son. Here I am, the cantor sings on certain days in the synagogue, and the room stills with all that it means to ask for mercy from a great, unflinching power. Here I am, I might say, to the oily darkness at the edge of this frame, these modern years when what we are is hated. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Chagall's painting, a mother reaches out to stop what can't be stopped. Her hands tear at the green shimmering of air. And this next poem, Saying Kaddish, is after a poem that I love very much by Gerald Stern. The dead sparrow at the edge of my lawn resembles a bundle of sticks tied together with feathers, as if a talisman left behind. Standing over the body, I almost want to touch the splintered claw and the feathers brown as crusted blood, that streak of white on the wing like a first Siberian snow. I am finding these weeks little ways of grieving who I am in this country. I track the words that wing across screens, the sharp beaks screeching, all those shrikes and hawks, the jays with their pecking. I listen too for silences. The morning, with its fierce indifference of light, is a hush I won't forget. I will remember the dawn is like something burned in the distance, a barn perhaps with its doors bolted shut and all the Jews trapped inside. Trauma is a scorch mark, and despite my usual impiety, I sway and bend above the bird. I make a shul on this sidewalk. I say sparrow, sparrow, sparrow in the place of a name. Little flame of a bird, I say, I am blessing your lifetime and days. So part of the later personal catastrophes of this manuscript is that my husband was diagnosed with cancer last year, and we went through really brutal treatments that at times left him even without a voice. So I turned to the Book of Lamentations to think about how to write a poem about my terror. So this is called How. How I listened to my husband sleep, how in my fear I was like a deserted city, dust in the street and the walls torn down. How the sickness hid somewhere in his throat. How I stared at my phone as if through a window. How I typed a list, all the things he does for me. My panic like an unwashed, stinking shirt. How my griefs outnumbered me. How they chased my thoughts to the riverbank. How years ago a woman wished on me deep suffering. How much that woman hated me. And I had thought back then, how strange she's cursing me to be human and alive. Eventually, we all become widows at the water's edge. How I reached across the bed toward him. How here it was now, the fallen city, the sanctuary sacked, the rubies stolen from the altar. How human the tumor that might mean death. How alive my weeping. How the list was lengthening, and the words were torches in the far-off hills. And I'll just end with these two poems. Spoiler, knock on wood, my husband came through his treatments well, and he seems well now. So this poem is called No Evidence of Disease. On the ramp to an underground parking lot, we passed through the scent of honeysuckle, sweetness so dense we stopped to find its unexpected source, vines twisting around metal posts and the leaves in oval pairs. We peered at the blossoms, each one no larger than a fingernail, but clustered together, they gave such syrup as if from a world to come. That remission once meant pardon for one's sins, this I could believe. When my husband received the phone call, it felt like being forgiven after months of coldness, like the end of a falling out between the body and the self. All was absolved, no evidence of disease, the doctor said. I could believe, too, remission once meant a slackening, a sending back, as when my husband loosened his grip on the leash to let our dog lean deep into the feather grasp that whispered at the edges of the road. We are passing through it all, I thought. This town, this week, whatever good fortune we scoop like a mound of soil with our hands, whatever bad as well. We should bury our faces in this moment, take in the perfume of this beautiful absence of illness, vanilla and white petals in the air. And I'll end with another villanelle. This one inspired by Mark Rothko's painting from 1958 called Black on Maroon. The painting is a sky, abstracted air we study through a window of maroon. An image of the world in disrepair, the picture warns each viewer every layer has fragments, broken pieces, tears. And soon the painting is a sky, abstracted air so dense its surface gleams like lacquerware. And underneath there's stone, a thing rough hewn, an image of the world in disrepair. Inside the darkened gallery, we stare at how the pigments look like ashes strewn. The painting is a sky. Abstracted air becomes a text, an Aramaic prayer we whisper to the dead all afternoon. An image of the world in disrepair, this canvas won't console. This almost square is like a floating grave, unsteady dune. The painting is a sky, abstracted, air, an image of the world we can't repair. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think what's interesting is I actually also have like in my veins the need to write about anti-Semitism even before we had this this explosion of anti-Semitism. I think it's just maybe it's part of like the Jewish identity, to a degree. And but I think it's just so important. Like it in some ways it can't be avoided and shouldn't. But I think also it's just our heritage too. And so it's natural. But I loved your poems and I can't wait to get your new book. Uh, Now I have the honor to introduce another great poet named David Lehman, who has been one of the great champions of American poetry in our time. As editor of the Oxford Book of American Poetry and founding series editor of the famous The Best American the famous series, The Best American Poetry. Yet Lehman is first and always a poet. To name a few, his books include Yeshiva Boys, When a Woman Loves a Man, The Morning Line, and The Evening Sun. His honors include fellowships from Guggenheim Memorial Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as a literature award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. His remarkable new collection, Ithaca, 60 sonnets of profound wit and wisdom, won the new Criterion Poetry Prize. It is one of the best collections of sonnets I've read in years. Yet, what I admire most about David Lehman, among along with his poetry, is his great pride in his Jewish identity. Please welcome David Lehman.
Well, thank you very much. What a wonderful introduction. And I'm very grateful for the compliments. And I wanted to congratulate both you, Baruch, and you, Jean, on your readings. You both read so well. And I enjoyed very much what you read. Baruch, your poem about Hank Greenberg was wonderful. And your beard poems are grand, and I believe that a book entitled Beards, it's a great title for a book, especially if there's more than one beard poem in it, and maybe you'll write even more. And Jean, I appreciated your villanelles and sonnets, and um, and
David,
Mark Rothko.
sorry to interrupt you, but I'm wondering if you would like to collaborate with me on a collection of Beard poems.
Well, why don't we talk about this another
I'm just
time?
kidding. I'm just kidding. Sorry, I put you in the spot. I apologize.
Well, no, I think it's a wonderful idea, and the abstracted air of the villanelle that Jean was reading, based on Rothko's Black on Maroon, and I appreciated that poem and the the Rothko poem that you began by quoting tragedy, ecstasy, doom, and so on, and. And also, I'd like to say how pleased I am to be reading with two others who are as committed as I am to combating anti-Semitism and to standing up for the Jews and Israel and Zionism. And, uh, and I was very moved by the poems that the two of you read. So thank you for those poems. Thank you very much. And in the spirit of what you just did, I wanted to read two little poems. One is a poem 3 lines long. It's called The One Constant. Anti-Semitism is to history what the speed of light is to Einstein's theory. That's called The One Constant. And the other poem I'd like to start with is called Dante Lucked Out. And this is from one of my books. I think it was in When a Woman Loves a Man, and also my selected poems. Dante lucked out. T.S. Eliot held that Dante was lucky to live in the Middle Ages because life then was more logically organized and society more coherent. The rest of us, however, can't be so sure that if we'd had the fortune to walk along the Arno and look at the pretty girls walking with their mothers in the 14th century, then we too would have composed La Vita Nuova and the Divine Comedy. It is, on the contrary, far more likely that we, transported to medieval Florence, would have died miserably in a skirmish between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines without the benefit of anesthesia, or would have been beaten, taunted, cheated, and cursed as usurers 2 centuries before the charging of interest became an accepted part of Calvinist creed, and other reasons needed to be produced to justify the persecution of the Jews. Well, I have this new book, Ithaca, that Baruch was kind enough to say was the best book of sonnets he'd read in some time, and how wonderful to hear that. So it consists of 60 of them, and I picked a few to read. It's in 2 parts, the book. The first 30 poems are called Ithaca, and the second 30 poems are called Gifts Reserved for Age. And from the Ithaca part, the epigraph is from Joachim du Bellay, the Renaissance French poet. Heureux qui, comme Ulysse, a fait un beau voyage. Happy the man who, like Ulysses, has made a beautiful voyage. Very hard to translate that seemingly simple sentence. Anyway, the Ithaca sequence has 2 lines that keep coming up. One is happy the man who, and the other one is what does he believe in? So number 5 from that selection series is happy the man who voyages in the vanguard with crazed mariners, reluctant prophets, compulsive liars, and tale tellers as the flask of brandy is passed from hand to hand, and the tobacco smoke fills the air like an arena in a black and white movie about brawlers from the Bronx and guys who fix the fights. Happy the worker on Friday nights, and the woman singing of her sorrow and her lust for Ulysses tied to the mast, who hears the longing that matches his own. What does he believe in? Yesterday, but a yesterday that has not yet come to pass or to grief, like his naive belief in the gods at play. Number 12. Happy the man who cultivates the illusion that he believes in nothing but the curative powers of the summer sun and the pleasures of the mind as he contemplates performing one last work of noble action before the ban on books begins. Happy the fellow who walks the city streets, infiltrates the crowd, leaves messages for strangers to read later, runs on anxiety, a cloud of unknowing protecting him. He knows what to do if someone shouts fire. The go-go ego prohibits lamentation for object loss in childhood, fear of castration in the phallic period, dread of the superego's ire. 13. What does he believe in? He believes in lateness. He arrived late last night. He came to his senses too late to recover anything or rescue anyone from the burning house. He watched it burn from the road. He believes that a genius lived here in a room exactly like his, with a window overlooking an array of pines, some deer, and a lake, with some lights twinkling on the rocks, and he is writing these words in this room in the burning house. Number 18, I think, I picked out. Happy the man who asks not, judges not, empties his pockets ungrudgingly, protests what he is powerless to prevent, and eats and drinks despite the death of a parent or a princely child. Happy the sons and their sisters seeking happiness without knowing what it is, and that is what they believe in, the pursuit of something lying ahead of them like a faint orange glow behind a distant bluff, warning the sailors of rough waters ahead until one of them, praising the Lord, leaps overboard and calm returns to the sea. 19. Happy the man who stays awake in the dark, alone with his thoughts as useful as bridges, built to be crossed by armies and blown up by boys in drab green uniforms whose whole life took place on a single night in a foxhole in the coldest December on record, and the men in the platoon knew that only 3 of the 5 would survive the night, but which 3 nobody knew, and so each took turns saying what he would do for his fallen comrades if he should be the one favored by fortune who returns to his native town dearer to him than the marble of monuments, majesty of courts, Doric temples in adoration of the golden calf. 21. What did he believe in? He believed in nothing and painted it, wrote odes to it, composed the music that other poets listened to when writing their odes to nothing. He believed the conception of divinity as cruel was probably healthy, though he was too soft-hearted to live like the gladiators who fought to the death and merged their bodies with concubines in bed, the oldest and most primitive form of intoxication. The fall of water drowned all else, but the concept of the day, dread, the poem of the day, Ulysses, and the moment when a man and a woman know they will make love for the first time. The hero knows he shall win at the odds, but thou wouldst not think how ill all's here about his heart, that stop sensation on his soul, and thunder in the room. 22. What did he believe in? guilt, not the remorse that follows lust in action, but the guilt at daybreak on waking from dreams of killing a friend and taking his place in the bed of the Muse in her sophomore year at Barnard when he was happy as the son of Ulysses, seeking news of his father and supping with the red-haired king and his wife, the most beautiful and fickle of abducted queens, who put a potion into her husband's goblet and her own, and now they can feast to their heart's content, oblivious to the suffering and sorrow they caused. So those are poems from the first half of the book, the half called Ithaca. The second half of the book, which is called Gifts Reserved for Age. And that title is lifted from these two lines from T.S. Eliot's poem Little Gidding, the last of the four quartets, where he announces, let me disclose the gifts reserved for age to set a crown upon your lifetime's effort. And then the gifts he lists are not ones that will brighten your birthday, let's say. Now, in the second half of the book, I gave titles to the individual poems, unlike the first half. So number one is called Now That He Was Here. Now that he was here, now that he'd arrived, a survivor on this crowded isle of cannibals, on cannabis, texting on their smartphones, he went to spy school and donned a disguise to infiltrate the mob with as little compromise as his career allowed. There were always a few who stood ready to accuse him of being a Jew and potential victim. Luckily, he was invisible and late for the meeting across the street. Like a bar without liquor, here he could meet people from the Bronx he would not otherwise meet. I've been sober for 10 years, not a sip of gin, though he still confuses pleasure with sin and death with last year's date on a vial of medicine. I'm going to skip to get to number 13, which is Love and Destiny. There was a time when the worship of a woman with the intent to couple with her was the unspoken goal of all well-born men in love with love, as Plato predicted, and formed the backbone of literature. Consider the medieval French romance. The hero's problem, now that he has arrived, has mated with a woman, is how to return to worldly duties, the need to make money and fight duels. Love and destiny were not always in alignment. For more than a year, the hero had to win the woman, then lose her, then win her a second time before bidding her adieu in front of her door. Oh, and I think right. Grand Central is number 18. He was on his way to make a fortune, but he had a train to catch. He bought a newspaper at the train station so as to look like anyone else, but no one was fooled. He would have joined the debate on tariffs and borders, but he had a train to catch. He was prepared to argue that the degradation of culture was the worst thing about the 2000s and could make the argument in 5,000 words, but he had a train to catch. 22, a red Mercedes. He tried to get off the train, but something always stood in the way. At one stop, a red Mercedes awaited him with the night's unbeatable first sip from the cup of conjugal love. It was tempting, but the sound of children at play, so easily mistaken for spontaneous joy, was not what the conductor promised the traveler. So he read the same newspaper and carried the same umbrella as the train pulled into the station in a windy city where the cold, wet pavement chills the salesman through heel and soul, and the best restaurant in town closes at 10. And then I thought I would read the last four in in the book. In other words, 27 through 30, 27 lessons learned. Anyone can be bought. Anyone can be sold. Anyone can be called. Anyone can be rolled. For every angry minute you lose, 60 seconds of happiness. Ceaseless as the cricket, all night till dawn flow her tears. A strong prison requires no bars. You can't think well unless you've dined well. You can't keep a secret unless you hide it from yourself. Nevertheless, there is pleasure in the pathless woods where you can bray all night before you shake down the stars. Love built of beauty dies when beauty dies. There are two tragedies in life, and whatever they are, you will endure them like a heart that breaks but continues to beat. 28. History. History is A, a restaurant with too many menu options. B, a textbook. C, an unsolved murder. D, repetitive, atonal, abstract, and as foreign to the mind of the future as the printed word is fated to be. Oh, there will be antique stores, museums, minor monuments, the fittest books surviving in deckle-edged paper, and maybe Shakespeare will lead the pack once scholars acknowledge he was a woman. You plan in the past, you stumble in the present, you fail in the future, and you call that history. History is loss, is dictated by the boss. History is a waste of time, but it's also a string of syllables, the train schedule, the maze, the garden, the hills. 29. The pious donors. The people are the same, as are the passions. Only the decor has changed, the fashions. And though you wouldn't guess it, the donors depicted in the blessed triptych of a golden annunciation may be scoundrels as vicious as any sins. History is an attic visited by an agnostic insomniac. But life, your life, isn't as complicated as the stages of grief, a public assassination, a crisis in belief. Without knowing why, our hero remains a do or die agent betrayed by his boss. He doubts everything but clings to the ignorance that is the mother of all things, even extraterrestrial forces or the fury of the sea, the violated earth, the unforgiving sky. And then the last poem, 30, not that he was here, not that he was here, not that he'd arrived, but that the questions would never cease, and the well-thumbed books remain on their shelves. That was his tentative conclusion. Will the poor always be with us? Do all pronouns refer to one dreamer, a stranger, a loner in a throng of strangers? Where was he going? Was there time enough for one more trip? But the train made an unscheduled stop, and he got out and walked away from protesters and police and the customary crowd of spectators. Was it for this that he gave up the God of the fathers? Would he stumble on the right answer now that he was here, now that he'd arrived? Thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Baruch. Thank you, Jehanne. Thank you, Erica. Um, anybody wish to say anything before we
Or ask
close
questions or
the chapter?
I want to just thank my fellow readers for putting an exclamation mark on our season. It really was wonderful having both of you. And I treasured your poetry you shared. And I hope to hear you read again soon.
And you, Baruch, the three readers.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to boast. That's not who I am,
I'll
even
do
though
that for you.
I'm the greatest of all time. I don't boast.
Greatest non-boaster.
The greatest. I'm the greatest non-boaster. Thanks. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks to JCC Buffalo for hosting us.
Always a pleasure.
And so what if we can, David, you mentioned if there's comments on the side. I guess there is now. You can do comments on the side. So there, are they accessible, Erica? The comments, the chat comments that people made?
Yeah. If you
Can
guys,
I think
sorry.
so. No,
if
you're good.
Yeah, if you look in the chat, if you activate, like if you
you
go
can
to
do
the
it now, but
bottom of your
later on,
page, it says chat, and just press on that chat icon.
yeah, yeah. I'm just wondering if later on, if any of the poets want to see what people said on
Press on
YouTube.
that.
May I ask a question, which is sometimes when people are on the Zoom, instead of seeing them as they are right this second, there's a photo of them. And how does one get that to work? Uh, uh,
That
I
I
have no idea. I mean, this is all. I changed my profile picture, but I don't know how to get that. Uh,
I don't know.
well, anyway, it
Yeah, I
doesn't
don't
matter.
know.
Yeah.
All my students do that too.
David, do you have a Zoom account?
I don't really know. I've been on
I
a number of Zoom calls, meetings, readings, and so on.
Yeshua, do you know?
I
Yeshua, my brother. Are
I
you
would be
there?
happy to help you offline. Get a profile picture if you ever want to do that. I did have a comment about the work, which I noticed really in this reading how much the formal work. It's hard for me to listen to poems on a Zoom,
Do you listen to
but I noticed the formal work. The was really entrained me, and I appreciated hearing formal work on a Zoom call like this.
Well, thank you.
this
I agree. It's very hard to listen, even at a poetry reading where we're uh, there in the flesh and hear the disembodied voice. I think it's very, very hard. But I tried to take some notes as the persons were reading. And Jean, I wanted to tell you that I'm a cancer survivor. And when you said that your husband had been diagnosed with cancer, uh, my heart leaped to my throat. And but I recovered. And I was glad to hear that a year later, there were no evil symptoms. So I thought the comments that you both made between poems were really very interesting and enhanced the reading. And Dick Westheimer, thank you for your comment. The sonnets are all irregular. That is, some of them are rhymed. Some have end in rhymes, and but they're all irregular in the organization. So to that extent, they're quite modern, even though there's a return to the 14-line form and the idea of a turn after 8 lines and so on. I believe that rhyme is one of the great things that will come back in poetry. I mean, I think people will get very sick of plain speech, free verse poems, which are basically sentences or not even chopped up, and there's a real slackness in American poetry today, I think, and to be avant-garde now, paradoxically, is to return to the forms and even meter, and to take advantage of the villanelle as a form, or sonnets, or abecedarias, or pantoum. Unless your subject is Beards, in which case you can just go to town. And between Beards and Hank Greenberg, I have a Sandy Koufax poem, by the way.
Yeah. If only Sandy Koufax had a beard, then he would have definitely been a subject of one of those poems.
He's 89.
Yeah.
Why not write the poem of Sandy Koufax with a beard?
Yeah, maybe I'll imagine him with a beard and make him an even better pitcher.
There you go. Well, how about that?
I don't see how anyone could make him a better pitcher than you.
Well, more longevity. I think that's the only thing that he kind of.
Well, he lived to be at least 89 years
Yeah,
old, and
he's still.
Ah,
he would have lost the use of his left arm.
I thought he was 90. Is he still 89? I thought he was
Pardon?
90. He's still around.
Yes,
Yeah.
he's the only survivor of the 1955 World Champions. And
wow.
I wonder how many of the 1963 World Champions are alive. Maury Wills is gone, Junior Gilliam's gone, Don Drysdale, Johnny Padres. Interesting.
Hmm.
He's a survivor, saying, and he looks great. And he's in great shape physically. You know, a lot of ex-ball players get balloon sized, and it's easy to get out of shape if you eat a lot, you don't exercise as much. But he somehow he looks terrific.
Yeah.
He goes to Dodger Stadium for big games.
Oh.
You know who had a sad life after his career? Roy Campanella. That, oh
You're telling
man.
me he was paralyzed. He got into
Yeah.
a car crash in the
Yeah.
winter of 1958.
Yeah. I think and just before that he got divorced.
Hmm.
I think like
Hmm.
right before it. And then
I do like hanging out with poets, but Dodger fans, that's a whole different
It's a different thing.
animal.
Are you in San Francisco?
No, near Cincinnati.
I
I'm
like
only
the
a
Reds.
Brooklyn Dodgers
I
fan.
like the Big Red Machine. That was quite a team, fantastic team. The Reds today are not quite in that league,
Yeah.
but I'm divided. I like the Mets as well as the Dodgers. You know, I live in New York, but I was a Dodger fan when they were in Brooklyn. So
Okay. That excuses you.
I just don't like the Giants very much.
Yeah.
All
Awesome.
right.
Thank you, everybody. This was amazing.
Thank you, everyone, the audience, the poets, the host, for making this amazing, and Erica for making this an amazing season overall and supporting us. And
And maybe next year we'll have just a series of baseball poems. One of the
That's a good
There
idea.
you go. And always a huge shout out to Phil and Baruch for, facilitating finding every single poet for this season. So it was a real treat. You guys did a great job. Thank you so much.
thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome.
It was tough finding Baruch, but I man,
It was tough finding me because you were trying to avoid me.
all right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.